We are at the Bella Villa in Spanish Fort to celebrate the Ashby reunion and 100th anniversary of the state of Utah, plus the 100th birthday anniversary of Susan Bates and Albert Ashby. We're just about getting ready to start. We're just a few of the posterity. And this shows the family, Albert and Susan, Gerald, Jane and Dean, Albert, Lamar right there, and Carl and Dean. A little bit of the memorabilia of the life.
Mom, I've got
I guess we're going to get started. We'd like to welcome you all here. Hi, Marilyn. We'd like to welcome you all here to this celebration for the Christmas party for the 100-year anniversary of Susan and Albert Ashby and for the centennial birthday party for the state of Utah. It's quite an honor that I've been given to get up and talk a little bit before you. And, I'm sure glad that we could gather together and do something that Susan and Albert would be proud of us. If they could see this, they'd be very proud. It was one of Susan's things. She was so proud of her children and her heritage. So she could only see this. What we're going to do is we're going to eat first, and then we're going to have a little program. And so each one of you, I guess, is expected to have a little something for the program. So you might be thinking about what you could say while you're eating. And I don't know, do you have something, Mike?
You bet.
Good.
The girls were looking at me like, do I have to have it?
Well, I was going to ask Mike to say the blessing on the food, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Our kind and gracious Heavenly Father, as we assemble together this evening, we are indeed thankful for the blessings we have. We're thankful, Father in heaven, for this season and the giving season and the Christmas season that it is. We're also indeed especially grateful, Father in heaven, that we could assemble together as family and loved ones this day to honor Susan and Albert Ashby of 100 years. We're thankful, Father in heaven, for the lives that they have provided for us. We're thankful for their spirits and all the blessings which they have provided for us and for each one of us, and the examples which they have set. Help us, Father in heaven, to reflect upon their heritage often in our lives and to renew their spirits with ours. We're thankful, Father in heaven, for the food that's been prepared for us this day. Help it to nourish and strengthen our bodies and do us the good that we need. We're thankful, Father in heaven, for our safety to get over here this day and this evening and bring the other ones who are coming in safety. And help us to have a good evening tonight and help thy spirit to be with us. We're thankful for the gospel in our lives and all the blessings we share. And these things we pray for humbly. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Here's just some of the families we start to eat.
Hi, Brad.
Thanks, David. Hi. I wanted to sneak in.
We waited for you. So what we want to do is just go ahead and eat, and as soon as we get through eating, we're going to start the program. We're going to start with my mother, Phyllis Ashby, and then we'll go from there. So enjoy. Got here and seen that Blaine was gathering the money, then I figured out why I was asked to do this. Garth never showed up. They don't trust me with the money, so.
Well, you do a good job of that.
Well, we're going to have Mother get up and do her little thing that she's going to do to honor Grandma, and then followed by Christina, and then after that, whoever gets up here first. We'll just let you go ahead from there.
There was nobody who could make turkey gravy as good as you, Phyllis.
Thank you, Steve. How many of you have seen the video of the Farley family reunion? Anybody else seen it? Well, you'll have to see it, because that's how I feel like tonight. Like the old man that got up there on a cane and said his little speech. But I got a good excuse to have a cane because I'm the oldest one here. But not much older than Dean and Jane.
But you're a lot older than Dean and Carla.
A lot. Well, Dean, he used to be Grandma's favorite son-in-law.
Still is.
Still is. Anyhow, I just wanted to tell you a little few things about Grandma and Grandpa's history that's not in their history, that you don't read when you read their history. And a few things that also were in there. But when they were young, they used to go to the dances over in Payson all the time. And the boys would come up from Lakeshore and meet the girls there, and that's when they started dating. It wasn't too long till he came alone a few times, just without the boys. And that's when they fell in love, and he asked her to marry him. And his family was moving to where?
Montana.
Montana. And he was going to go away for a while, so he got the ring on her finger before he left. And if all of you that knew Grandma just knew what she'd do with that ring after he left to go to Montana, she put it up and she says, "I'm not going to wear that ring, I'm going to play the field while he's gone." Which she did, I guess, I don't know, but that's what she said in her history. But then when he came back and for a short time and wanted to get married and then take her back to Montana with him. So anyhow, he came back and they set the wedding day for December 15th, and they went to the Salt Lake Temple and was married by George F. Richards. And that they left. They had to leave kind of early in the morning to go. And this is the part that's not in the history. But the people, and how I happened to know it is because I took Grandma to Salt Lake to the doctor one day. And I says, "Grandma, you just got to get your history written." And she says, "Oh, I'm not going to. I'm not going to do it." And she says, "I don't want to write my history." So I said, "Well, tell me a few things that happened to you and Grandpa." And so she started telling me this little story. And in those days, when couples would get married, all their friends would chivalry them. Do you know what chivalry means?
Yeah.
They'd play dirty tricks on them. And so they found out that some of their friends was going to be at the depot when they left to go to Salt Lake. There was a train that ran from Salt Lake, Payson to Salt Lake, that was called the Orem. And they were going to go on that train. So they expected all these friends was going to be there. Well, they thought, well, we're going to fool those friends and we'll go to Spanish Fork and catch the train instead of Payson. So that's what they did. They went, Grandma and Grandpa Bates took Susie over, and the Ashby grandparents took him, and they got on the train and said goodbye to their parents, and they just barely got on it till here come all the group of their friends, and they was in horse and buggies and on horseback and everything, and they come up to the train, and Albert and Susan had got on it and says goodbye. So they fooled them that way, and they went up to Salt Lake, and they got them a motel or a hotel room, and it was called the New House Hotel, and they stayed there, and they had quite a ways to walk to the temple. And after they got their luggage and everything settled in the hotel, they started to walk up to the temple where it was. And on the way, Grandma saw this little hat shop, and it was called Sybil's Hats. And she says, "Oh, Albert, I've just got to have a hat, a new hat." She says, "I want to go to church the first Sunday we're married, first Sunday that I'm Mrs. Albert Ashby, I want to have me a new hat." "You can't have a new hat. We don't have the money." Susan, she always called her Susan. He says, we just can't afford it. We'll do good to pay the meals and the hotel, the expenses." She said, "Well, I'm going to have it anyhow." So Grandma had her hat, and it was a pretty little blue, velvet hat. And so it was December, but it was a nice day, so they went up to the temple, and she wore her hat, and it was so pretty on her. And then they went in the temple, and George F. Richards was the one that married him, and they had a wonderful day there, and it just was filled with love and everything. And so anyhow, when this was over, they went to go home, and when they went out, it was snowing, just lightly. She had high heels, and he put his arms around her, and she's, "Oh, my hat, I'll get it ruined." So Grandma went back in the temple and got a paper sack for her to put over her hat. And he carried it the rest of the way up to the temple, and or the west up to the motel. Well, when they got up there, they sat in the lobby for a while and talked about their wonderful marriage and how happy they were and what the future had in store for them, and just really trying to pass time, I'd say. Pretty soon they got brave enough to go up to their room, and they... Be quiet, David. This is my story. They got up, finally they went up to their room, and she said, "Well, come on, Albert, let's go to bed. We're married." And so they did. She went in and got undressed, and she come out in the most beautiful nightgown. "Where's Melanie?" "Melanie's going to show you what it's like." "Put it on, hon." Oh, she's not even putting the sleeves in, but it was that was her beautiful nightgown. And he said, "Oh, this is the happiest day of my life. You are so beautiful. You are just so beautiful." And so she crawled in bed beside of him, and he gave her a hug, and then he reached up and turned the gas light off. And that left him in the dark, and that's where I'm going to leave you.
What happened after that?
I got a little bit more of the story, though, to tell you. The Sybil hat business. After the next spring, when it was close to Easter, she says, "I'm going up to Daughters of the Pioneers Convention, and I'm going to buy me a new hat, Sybil's hat." "Oh, Susie, you're going to do that again?" She said, "Well, I got to have a spring hat, so we're going to go." And he said, "Well, we can't afford this every year." She said, "We can afford it. And when I get daughters-in-law and grandchildren, they're all going to go up there with me and get new hats." Now, everybody put their hats on. Everybody that's got a hat, come on. Jane's substituting tonight. She's wearing her, just a little tiny one. But she always...
Flowers that they wore at the same period.
Jane always wore flowers.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody look around and see everybody's hats.
This is a spring hat. I think we ought to have a fashion show.
Okay. Come on, everybody.
We want to show off. Come on, get up here. Come on, Jane. Right here, stop. His hat's off. Hi, Renee.
Everybody walk around and show off their hats.
Like your picture. We ought to get rid of it.
Yeah, walk up there and I'll take your
Come on,
picture.
kids. Let's have a shot of the hats. Oh, you're
Everybody that's got a hat, come on.
this back.
Get in closer if you can.
Get in close for David's picture.
Get in closer.
Gotta get way over.
Watch out. You gotta get closer together.
Get the short ones in front, get closer together.
Get close together, little girls. Can you do it, David?
And get in a little bit closer. More.
Scrunch in.
Honey,
All right, here, I'll get out in the front.
Yeah, you look cute. We got married. Almost had her with coal black.
And it was down.
Dean had some.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I did. You didn't have to say that.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I even got proof of it.
This is the end of my story, all but to say that I'm glad that I married into the Ashby family. And I just love all of these people. I'm so thrilled at how good every person is. Wouldn't those parents be wonderful, happy to see us all here together tonight? And all the families that have such good kids. Thanks for being good. Oh, I was also going to tell you that some of it was fictitious. But I wanted to emphasize that they were like Albert and Susan.
Why don't you bring the mic back over here?
Okay. This is a quote by President Gordon B. Hinckley. It's good to look at the past and gain the appreciation for the present and the positive for the future. It's good to look upon the virtues of those who have gone before, to gain strength for those for whatever lies ahead. It's good to reflect upon the work of those who labored so hard and gained so little for this world. But out of those dreams and early plans we well nurtured has come a great harvest of which we are beneficiaries. Their tremendous example can become a complementing motivation for all of us. For each of us, there's a pioneer of his own life.
My name's Dean Ashby. I'm the second son of Albert and Susan Ashby. And to a lot of you here, I'm Uncle Dean. To a lot of you here, I'm Grandpa Dean. Several times. And I want to talk about my dad first. I never really knew my dad until I was older. He was always too busy working. He never worked just one job. He worked a steady job, 40, 50 hours a week, and then what little time he had a farm he was renting. And I remember one year I was 16, and we leased a farm, he did, and I had 6 acres of sugar beets to do myself. I had to water them, weed them, and everything. The only help I ever got was when we harvested. We used to take and hold it in our hand and put it on our knee and cut the tops off and then pile it in a rick. Then a wagon would come through the ricks and we'd throw it on. But he was a quiet gentleman, after you got to know him. But I don't know, it seems like when I was younger, I just grew up and everything was money, money, money. Couldn't get any money, you know. And during the Depression, he had a job. Wasn't making a lot, but back then, people were working for $2 a day. And then later on, he got a job over in Geneva. He worked on construction for a while. By the way, he was a steel tire. He went to California when shortly, you know, I don't know, too many years after they were married. He stayed down there for better than a year alone and learned to cut the construction trade of steel. And he was good, he was fast. One of the fastest men ever, you know, with a pair of pliers, twisting the wire together and tying the steel. But they had hard times, really hard times. But I know he was such a devoted father. I never really knew, like I said, until I was older. When we built our home, every day he had to spare, he would be up there to help me. I didn't care what it was. He wanted to help. And he sincerely did, and he did help me. But I want you all to know the gentle side of it. And he had beautiful wavy hair, and he'd spend hours brushing his hair every morning. A very clean person, always was real clean. And he was really a nice man. You'd all loved him. If you, most of you, some of you have seen him or acquainted with it. But he was really a good father. And he taught me how to work. And he taught me a lot of things. He taught me how to study, and, you know, he was an ardent reader. He read a lot, and most of it was scriptures. And he really was a devoted Mormon, him and Grandma both. But he was a wonderful father. And my mother, she also was a wonderful mother. She would give everything away if people needed it. She got that from her parents. They were Bateses. My grandfather was Joseph, and my grandmother was Martha. But they didn't have much then. They had about 20 acres of ground, and he was sexton of the cemetery. And that's the way they made their living. But I know when Jay and I got married, we finally rented a little 2-room home, and here about the second day we come up, here she come up with a bucket. It had bacon in it, had lard in it, and she wanted to know if we had any fruit. So Jane took her down in our cellar at that time and showed her. We did have fruit, we had a lot of it. But she was so concerned about us not going hungry. Of course, we never went hungry because we lived pretty close to Grandma Suzy too. And we'd always go over and get a little from her, you know, or she'd bring it over. But it was a struggle those first few years. But I dearly loved her, and I appreciate especially Aunt Phyllis and Marilyn. They were so good to Grandma. She used to say, well, if you can't take me, Phyllis will. And she was, you know, she had a short fuse like that. I remember one time she was in the hospital, and I had the car to work. We only had one then, and she called up Jane, come up and get me. Jane said, well, I can't, I haven't got no car. Well, I'm going home now. My gosh, it wasn't 20 minutes, she was home. It didn't matter who she called all the neighborhood and everybody till she got what she wanted. She got home. And that was just her way, but she was a sweet lady, really sweet, and we love her so much. And I want to compliment Jane too. She was the only one home most of the time because we all worked, and she took her a lot of places that a lot of people never knew. To the hospitals, and if she had to go somewhere, she was just supposed to drop everything and go, which she usually did. But I am proud of our heritage, and like Aunt Phyllis said, I'm proud to see all of you here and continuing this heritage. That's all I got to say. Thanks.
Grandma didn't have a lot of granddaughters. She just had Ann and I and Linda. But I can remember how much she thought that every person that came into our family was her very own. Every daughter-in-law every grandson that she got married, that person was her granddaughter too. And I thought that was a really neat quality that she had. Another thing I wanted to tell you is that this last year I've been trying to clear the Ashby line for all the temple work that hadn't been done. I didn't do any research. Martha Ashby did most of that, Martha Tanner, on the Ashby line. But we have a lot of names that still need to be done. A lot of endowments that for both men and women. John's going to finish doing the initiatory work, aren't you, John, next week? Keep saying next week, okay. And you can do it at the Mount Timpanogos Temple or the Provo Temple, but they've changed now, and I have the records, and then you have to bring them back to me. When we get them all done, we can take them back to the temple. Sometimes they're going to have them in so that you can do them in Arizona, but now they just have it in the two temples now. But they're going to change that. But so it'll be neat to have all these people done. A lot of them are ceilings of people. What I did is instead of just saying that this person didn't exist or she didn't have a name, if they just knew her name was Elizabeth, she could be sealed as Mrs. Elizabeth, whoever her husband was. And that's just a new thing that church has changed, so it's made a lot of sealings that we can do now. So it'll be fun to do that and be able to have those families sealed together. And I appreciate all the ones who have helped do it, because I know a lot of you have. Even Corey, it's hard to get all the baptisms done, and so all the kids have done the baptisms and all the women's initiatory work is done, and most of the men's. And then they just need to do the endowments, but they take the longest and the hardest. So anybody that can, we need help, okay? I was going to tell you something else, but I don't know what else. I know there's two things I was going to tell you. I don't know, I guess I'll let Steve have the microphone, since he's over there itching, I can tell.
Oh, you can tell, huh?
Yeah, I can tell.
Sorry. I hope that all the grandchildren, me being the second youngest, would all recognize this. Top right here is broke, and that's the part I want to tell you about. About 30 years ago, when I was 10, we were over to Grandma and Grandpa's having, 20, sorry. No, I was 30, really. We were over having Sunday dinner, which we did a lot of time, and I remember dropping this, and this was just to let you know how short Grandma's fuse was. Grandpa made some derogatory comment, and Grandma jumped right in and said, "Damn it, Albert, leave the boy alone and let him eat his dinner." And I was lucky enough to get this when Grandma died, and boy, we cherished it. It's been in a couple households, but it's something that I've always hung on to. And I appreciate Grandma and Grandpa very much too, because they gave me a beautiful, wonderful mother. And there was so much in Grandma Ashby that I see in my own mother, her strong will and her perseverance and her achievement and her goal-oriented. And they passed that down to us. And I'm sure Grandpa and Grandma are up there right now eating dinner, which means Grandpa has his stuff slopped all together and he's just spooning it in. And Grandma's particular and has everything divided into certain sections of her plate, but I'm sure they're enjoying it up there, listening to all of us pay tribute to them.
I guess they hear me. Talking about Grandma and Grandpa's marriage.
Jane, put the microphone down a little.
That's fine.
That work?
I guess it works. In talking about Grandma and Grandpa's marriage, in doing my genealogy, it was very interesting to me that their names were together, Grandpa and Grandma's, and my mother's brother and his wife were married the same day. And I thought that was very interesting. Grandpa Ashby had really a hard time in his latter years to go even to get a haircut. And I would pick him up, and there was only a few places that he could raise his feet up high enough to get into the barber shop. So we went riding a lot of times for a long time, waiting for this certain parking so he could get a haircut. He also enjoyed the senior citizens very much, especially on the bingo games. And I would take him on several occasions when the bus wasn't able to take him. And he was very delighted when he would win, which was usually possibly a package of Jell-O. And I would get the Jell-O for my effort of taking him. He enjoyed all the senior citizen programs, and there was a bus that took him the majority of the time, but there was times that he couldn't go, and also I would take him and also pick up meals and take him back to him. And it was a very enjoyable time, but this is the latter part of his years.
I'm just going to sneak up really quick here. I remembered a couple things about Grandma Ashby. I didn't know Grandpa Ashby, but as a new member coming into the family several years ago when Steve and I were married, I think that Grandma Ashby passed away about 6 months after Steve and I were married, but I was at my office one day and I got a phone call that my grandmother was on the phone. And I thought, now, what? My grandmother never calls me. I mean, my grandmother by this time was quite elderly. She lived far away, and I saw her on holidays every once in a while, but she never called me, especially at my office. Anyway, so I get this phone call, and I'm just totally astounded. Why would my grandmother call me? She just doesn't do that. Anyway, I get on the phone, and it was Grandma Ashby, Grandma Suzy. And she was very sweet and very open and so welcoming to me, to the family, right in the very, very beginning. And she didn't waste any time telling me what Steve and I needed to do. So anyway, and I appreciate too the mother that she was to Carla, because I think that those qualities and benefits have passed on down through all of the kids and the daughters-in-law and now the grandchildren, and the wonderful example that they all are to us. Thanks.
I have a lot of memories of my grandparents. This picture that you can see of my mother and grandpa, one thing you notice about him is how trim he was. One of the things that I remember about Grandpa Ashby is that he did push-ups, ramrod straight push-ups. Remember that, Steve? We'd stay over at their house in the summer times occasionally. We were the youngest, pretty much the youngest grandkids. We thought we were going to be the youngest grandkids until Mike came. And then he became kind of the special one. We could never figure that out. In any event, when we'd stay over there, we'd sleep in her bed, and of course she'd be up at 4 a.m. in the morning listening to the agricultural report on KSL, and vacuuming and had the washer going, and it was noisy, and you pretty well couldn't sleep past 4:30. But Grandpa would do these ramrod straight push-ups. The guy never cheated on a push-up. You know, when you do push-ups, you tend to kind of cheat on the last few. Not him. He had the straight back and strong arms, and he would do, how many? He would do like 50, like just like that. He'd just get down and he'd do them. And the 50th one, his back was just as straight as the first one. And by that time, he was retired from the plant. And he'd had those hips that had been a problem for him all those years, but he still did it. The other thing about the trimness, it just dawned on me when Steve mentioned it. There must be something, if nutritionists studied it, that they tell us that you can stay trim like this if you swirl your food together. Because he was remarkable at this swirling effect. He kind of put his food down his plate, and if we had a biscuit or a roll, do you remember this? He'd get a biscuit or a roll, and he'd pretty well then just kind of swirl everything and use the roll and eat it. And it was kind of an interesting technique. But he always stayed trim and slim and looked good. And I also remember I remember a lot of things about him, but one other thing about him that Steve and I used to kind of tease about is that he always wore Vitalis on his hair. And he always had this little greasy spot on the back of his easy chair. And I guess you got to say good things and bad things when you eulogize or when you talk about people, but we always kind of thought that was funny that he always used this vitalis heavily in his hair. Grandma made the greatest fried chicken around. You all probably know that. Anybody who's eaten there knows that she made absolutely the best fried chicken. And we used to love eating over there, and we could never figure out why our mother couldn't copy that recipe. Our mother could do lots of things.
The same on the eggs.
Cook Phyllis's turkey gravy.
Well,
Same on the eggs. Grandma made the best scrambled eggs, and my
That's
mom
true.
put milk in it, and they were terrible.
but the fried chicken was wonderful. I could never figure out what she did special. And I remember, what did she do?
They used to raise chickens, and I've gone over there when grandpa's gone out and chicken house and chickens, and now are gone.
We didn't
So they
ever
were
hear
fresh.
that side of the story.
Yeah, I don't remember that. But I'll tell you what.
I'll say I remember my mother could go outside, catch a chicken, put its head on the chopping block, chop off the head, pull the skin off, skin that baby, come in, clean it, cook it, and serve it. All on Sunday to unexpected company.
Well, I think she was pretty well getting Joe Albertson's chickens in my day. I don't remember that she was. I don't remember that she ever caught live chickens. But we couldn't figure out why my mother couldn't copy the recipe, because my mom made good chicken, but Grandma just made this chicken that Colonel Sanders would be envious of. The couple of things that I wanted just to close telling you are things that I remember most and that make me most emotional about my grandmother. My parents are wonderful, and as Steve said, one of the greatest tributes to grandmother was the fine children that she raised. Uncle Dean, Uncle Lamar. I didn't know Uncle Gerald as well, but my own mother, I saw those wonderful attributes that I saw in my grandmother reflected in my mother's life as well. One thing that my grandmother did, we were growing up, my parents were less active in the church, and grandmother, I remember the earliest lessons learning how to pray. I'm sure my parents also taught me that, but the earliest lessons that I remember about how to pray was from my grandmother. And at the time, my parents were not active in church, and we were really concerned as young children that we weren't sealed to our parents. And we were also really concerned that there were things that we wanted them to do that they weren't doing in the church. And I expressed those concerns one time to Grandma Ashby, and she taught me how to pray. And she taught me how to pray for my parents. And I said a lot of prayers over the next 10 years or so until my parents went to the temple and we were sealed with them. But that was one of the earliest lessons I learned from her, and I really owe her a debt of gratitude for that. When I was on my mission, I'll close with the two last things. When I was on my mission, she wrote me every single week. I have over 100 letters that I saved, and she wrote me every single week. What's amazing about that is I didn't write her, I'm ashamed to say, very often. I was lucky if I would kick one out a month to her, but she wrote me 4 a month, sometimes 5 a month. And in those letters, one of the things that she almost always did is she bore her testimony of the Savior and of the restored gospel. And I never had a doubt that my grandmother knew that God lived, that Jesus was the Christ, and that this was the restored church. She never gave me pause in her conduct, in her private conversations, in her example, or in her life to doubt that she knew. And I knew that she knew, and that gave me strength. The last thing that I thought was interesting about her is that she always made us feel like we were the most special of her grandchildren. And as I grew up, I always thought she loved Steve and I, and later Mike, the most. And then as I got a little older, I started paying a little more attention, and I recognized she said the same things about Dwayne, and about Garth, and about David, and about Blaine, and about Daryl. She loved them just every bit as much as she loved me. But I'm sure she made them feel like she made me feel like we were the most special of her grandchildren. She said, I heard her talking one time, particularly as I recall about Dwayne, she said some things to somebody about Dwayne that I thought, wait a sec, I thought I was your most beloved grandson. Now you're talking about Dwayne like you love him more than you love me. And I realized she just had this great way of making people feel good and feel loved. And she's a heck of an example of that.
You're maybe getting kind of a heavy dose of the homes here, but maybe we just like to get finished early. I think I'll start by telling you a little bit about my dad and what a great guy I thought he was. When I was kind of putting my thoughts together, I thought of the different facets of Dad's personality. And I thought that he was really a man of the soil. He loved to grow things. I remember some of the neighbors came over in his later years. Joan Jones came over and he taught her how to grow potatoes. And he'd go out in his later years when he was so stiff with arthritis, bad back, bad hips. But like Brad said, he kept, he exercised and he watched his diet and he did the best he could with that arthritis. But he'd go out and he'd have a little nail on the end of his cane and he'd dig weeds out of the ground and get rid of those weeds so he could have nice flowers and so he could have vegetables. And he always told me, I want to live one more year, sister, in his later years. I want to live one more year, sister. I want to see the corn come on again. So he was a man of the soil. He was also an intellectual man. He only had an 8th grade education, but the Ashbys were very bright and he gave us good intellectual genes. And he loved to read and he read everything. And when, after he died, we were going through his things, I got a few of his books. And it was interesting, like Dean said, he read a lot of scripture, but he also read a lot of church books. In addition to that reading, one thing that I thought was interesting about him was that he rarely missed BYU Education Week. And he'd take his vacation from the plant, and he'd get on a bus and come from Payson to Provo and go to Education Week. And he'd take classes that entire education week. That was the kind of intellect that he had. He was also a religious man, and I don't think he was ever any more pleased than when he was asked to serve as a ward clerk in the 4th Ward. Let's see, that was with Phyllis helped me, Dean helped me, with Heber Curtis and Leon Fulmer.
Heber Curtis was the bishop.
Heber was the bishop. Leon was a counselor. Oh, I think it was, Schramm, Ronnie.
Schramm, lived down there by Essen's old home.
Okay. Anyway, that was a great calling for Dad, and he really enjoyed it. And he was a steel man. He loved his job at Geneva. That, like Dean said, he worked several jobs, and he really did work hard to play the provider role. And he was really a pretty good provider, even though they didn't live very well. And certainly by our standards today, you'd say that they were very poor. But Dad was really a pretty good provider. He always had 1 or 2 jobs, and he always saw that the money always came home to his family, and he certainly wasn't selfish, didn't spend it on himself. But he was one of the first employees at Geneva. He helped build the plant, and then he began working for U.S. Steel. And he was at Geneva for, I think it was 30 years, Dean. Do you think he worked that long?
Yeah, I think so.
But anyway, he did a great job at Geneva. And he was a union man. And so when I went to work at the plant, I happened to go to work in a clerical position, but it was a union eligible job. And so, of course, Utah's a right to work state. You don't have to join the union. So the question was, do you want to join the union or not? And so I joined the union. And why did I do that? Because my dad had taught me that if you're in a union eligible job and you take the benefits that the unions fought for, then you pay your dues. Well, I got out to work in metallurgical, chemical, and inspection department, and I found out, gee, you're really a rarity, a clerical person that's paying your union dues. What are you getting out of the union? And I said, well, my dad's a union man, and he taught me that I needed to pay those dues. And so I did, and then pretty soon I had an opportunity to go into a non-eligible union job. And so I did that, and I remember by the time I got promoted into management, Dad had retired, but he was very skeptical that his daughter was in management. And he was kind of proud of me, but he was so skeptical. And I remember one Sunday, I got another promotion, and he put his hands like this, and he said, well, I guess you're one of those high mucky mucks now, huh? And I'll tell you, it wasn't a lot of pride that came over in that voice. It almost made me feel like I ought to be back paying my union dues. But I do have really a lot of good memories of Dad. And I remember when we had to put him in the convalescent center. And it was really hard, but we didn't feel like there was a choice because he was so stiff and so hard to lift. And Mother couldn't take care of him. None of us could take care of him, really. He was too heavy and hard to move. And so we took him to a convalescent center, and it was really hard for us to do. And it was especially hard for me. Well, maybe everybody could tell that story, but I know I felt really tender about it. And he'd call me at the office. He really resisted going. And he'd call me at the office for a little while, and he'd say, Sister, I hate this. You've got to come and get me. You've got to take me home. And it would just tear me up. But the thing that I wanted to tell you was that gradually he recognized that I couldn't come and get him and that he had to stay. And so he was a good sport about it, and he accepted it, and he made the best of it, and he made some friends there, and we'd stop and pick him up and bring him home, and have him have Sunday dinner with us, or take him for a ride or something, and then take him back. And he was a good sport, and he accepted it. Then when he had a stroke, and we took him down to Utah Valley Hospital, my dean, was really good to spend some time with him. And the night before he died, Dean had been there all night with him. And then Dean Ashby came, and I think you were with him when he died, weren't you?
Me and Mother.
And I was on my way down to the hospital, and Justin Dean, our very first grandchild, Brad and Barbara's first child, was born within 15 minutes. He was born at Utah Valley Hospital within 15 minutes of the time that Dad died at Utah Valley Hospital. So we've always thought that maybe Dad did get to meet en route one of our grandchildren, because Justin was our first grandchild. Well, this could go on all night if everybody takes as long as I do, but I have to tell you just a thing or two about my mom. She was really the family communicator. And I don't know about you, but I've missed her for that reason, among others. But I always knew what was happening to all of you by talking to Mom. She kept me informed on what every one of you were doing. And I've always felt like, as her daughter, that should kind of be a role that I should play, and I don't play it well at all. And so we really miss that communicator, that tie that we had. She was a hub of information. Well, she was quite civic-minded. She did, if you look up here at the table and take a little bit of time, you can see that she was quite civic-minded. She was really avid about the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers and played quite a few leadership positions there. She organized, she was so proud of Lamar. Lamar, the son that isn't here, was really her favorite child. Wouldn't you agree, Dean?
I probably was.
Dean and I used to marvel that Lamar could show up every 5 years or every 10 years and he could do no wrong. And Dean and I and Phyllis would be there all the time, but we never were quite as neat as Lamar. But anyway, she was really proud of Lamar and his role in the Navy. And so she organized the Navy Mothers Club in Payson. And she was its first president, and she saw that they had names of all the servicemen in the park, and that they had floats in the parades, and that they honored the veterans on Memorial Day. And she took her first trip back east with Vera Frankham to a Navy Mothers Convention. If you look up here on the table, you'll see a picture of her and Vera, and she had on her hat, and I'm sure it was from Sybil's Hat Shop. And they were back in New York City, and that was quite an adventure for Mother and Vera. She later went to Hawaii, and there's a picture up here of her with her tour group that went to Hawaii. So she loved to do things like that. She really did like to travel. We took her to Idaho when her niece and her niece's husband had their 50th wedding party. She loved to do things like that. She also loved to grow flowers. And you all remember the African violets and all the cans and plastic dishes full of flowers. And she couldn't come and visit because she needed somebody to water the flowers, somebody to feed the wild cats, and she had to, she told me once that she couldn't come and stay all night because when she came back home, the weights on the cuckoo clock would be on the floor. And she had to be there to wind the clock, sleep in her own bed, water her plants, and feed the cats. People have already talked about her generosity. She really was a generous person, and she always kind of worried about the underdog. If there was somebody who had a problem in town, somebody that was a little different, somebody that was ostracized for one reason or another, that was the person that Mother adopted and tried to help and did all she could for. She always had a job somewhere, it seemed to me. She worked at the cannery. She worked at Woolworths, sold candy, and pardon me, so she could buy hats. Phyllis is right. And then when she went to work for Deseret Industries, she really did have a special liking for all the people there. She was really proud of her service there and proud of her career there. She just really enjoyed it. My kids and I were talking about some of the things that we remembered. This gave us, planning for the party gave us an opportunity to talk, and they all remember how whenever Mother would see one of them, she would be so proud of them. She'd introduce them to everybody at DI. Everybody there had to meet him and be proud of them with her. She also valued education, and she liked to read, and she wrote really well. She wrote very nice, interesting letters. And she was a strong spirit. We all know what a strong spirit she was. The day she died, she had just fought to live so long and so hard. And I sensed that it was time for her to go, and I took her in my arms and I told her that it was now time for her to go and to relax and to go. And it was really hard for her, but she did. And she was a remarkable woman. As I've thought about my mom and dad, I've concluded that probably two of the most important things that parents can leave to their children would be, the two most important things we could give to our children probably would be roots and wings.
And I think they did a really good job at doing both of those. And so we thank them for it.
Marianne, has Lisa got those papers to hand out? We copied some papers that kind of will give you a feeling of what it was like 100 years ago, and what it was like the year that Grandma and Grandpa got married. It's not that one. Lisa's got them, and she'll pass them around to people, okay?
Justin, I see you still using Grandpa's $5.
I'd just like to say a few words about Grandma and Grandpa Ashby. Grandpa Ashby, I'll start with him first. I thought I was a pretty neat kid growing up when I was, younger, and 8, 9, and 10 years old. And I was 16 when Grandpa died. But it was about 10 years old when he would sit in that chair, which had the Vitalis stain on the back, and he would tell me to go in and get the checkerboard. And I said, okay, Grandpa, you understand, Grandpa, that you're playing with the Pro Bowl champion for 10-year-olds.
And in fact, he was in the Herald.
Because I was in the Herald and I brought that over. I don't know, I'd won a checker tournament. I thought I was a pretty neat checker player. So I showed him, and Grandpa said, okay, go get the checkerboard and let's see who's the best checker players. So I moved a couple of moves, and pretty soon I didn't have any players left. I got whooped. and so then I thought, well, Grandpa, you just got lucky. So we did it again, and the same result came about. And then the third game, Grandpa threw the game. He let me win a game.
Yeah.
And I don't know why he did that, just to keep me coming back, I guess. But that was fun. I remember that I thought I was pretty good, and he humbled me.
I don't think anybody in the family ever beat him.
Nope, nobody could beat Grandpa
All of
at
us knew that we
checkers.
couldn't beat him except Mike.
And
Mike's a little slow.
so
Then he showed you how to play giveaway, right?
yeah. But Grandpa Ashby was an interesting man to me, and I learned a lot from him growing up. Renee, my wife, never was able to meet Grandpa Ashby, but she did meet Grandma, and it was right before I went on my mission that she met Grandpa Ashby, or Grandma Ashby. And I told Grandma that, oh yeah, Renee will be around when I get back in 2 years, and she'll wait for me the whole time. And she's not even going to date Grandma Ashby while I'm gone. Isn't that good? And she looked right at Renee and said, Renee, you date everybody in sight. And she told her to play the field, much as Aunt Phyllis explained earlier. And so that was a fond memory. I guess my earliest memory was one that Grandma Ashby always told me. Grandma Ashby told me when she would come to babysit me, while I was a little 3-year-old toddler at the time, she came over and I rode my trike into a flood one time. And we had ditches down on 3rd South in Provo where we lived, and it always backed up, and so there was water, and obviously a little boy is going to jump into a puddle and he's going to think that's a fun deal. But anyway, this thing was a flood, and Grandma stood on the edge of it and told me to ride my trike immediately out of that flood. And I said, no, Grandma. No, Grandma, I'm not going to do that. So she said, you don't think I'm going to come in there and get you? You're crazy. She marched in there, grabbed me by the ear, and pulled me out of that flood, told me that she'd have none of that. So that was a fond memory of Grandma Ashby that I had. But there was quite a few. Like Brad, she did write me every week that I was on my mission. I was on an 18-month mission. They shortened that mission while I was out. And she wrote me all 18 months every week, and included in that, for me, a $5 bill every week to tell me to go out and buy myself a lunch.
She really did like you better.
And see, there were some special things to being the youngest grandchild, which I was her youngest grandchild.
Yeah, but you weren't a girl.
That's right. She wanted me to be a girl real bad. Michelle was supposed to be my name, and now I have a daughter that's named Michelle. So, but anyway, she also wrote me in my letter and bore testimony, just as she did with Brad. All the same things. And one thing I really learned from her was gratitude. She taught me to always be grateful for the things which I have, which we all are blessed so much comparatively to the times when she was growing up and the times that our parents were growing up. We all have it so much easier and a lot better. And that's one thing that we all need to think about, probably at this holiday season, is to be a little more grateful for all the things which we have. And she taught me that. And I'm grateful to her for teaching me that.
Oh, here comes her favorite.
No, I was your favorite granddaughter.
No, I was. Lyndon, Marilyn, and I were special because we always got to go Christmas shopping, and they got to go when they were 16, but because I was the youngest granddaughter, and I felt left out, they let me go when I was 12. And so every first Saturday in December, we'd go to Provo shopping. Grandma would take us out to lunch and pay for our lunch and buy us a little Christmas flower corsage that we wore on our coat, and we felt really special that day. It was a fun day. But as I was listening to everybody this evening, and it's been so fun to be here and share memories with you, I can't help but picture my dad up in heaven with Grandma and Grandpa looking down on us. Because of you, he has gone on and lived and been a part of our lives. He died early, and that was hard on our family. In fact, that Christmas Day that Jane and Dean got in that car accident, and Dwayne and Jane and Dean ended up in the hospital, and my dad was already there. That was a big memory for me, and I'm sure every one of you here can remember that, or remember having been told about that day. And the memories of the Ashby family are so prevalent in every one of our homes, in raising our children and taking care of our responsibilities and teaching our children the gospel and raising them well. And I'm sure that we can thank them for that. Somebody else's turn in my family. Thank you. Lane, get up there. Come on, Blaine.
Becky leave? Well, while we're waiting for the Ashbys, I was the favorite son-in-law. There was no doubt about it.
Only son-in-law.
Well,
It doesn't matter.
one thing I remember about Albert is that when I come into this family, I could not believe anybody in this valley didn't know how to fish. We took him fishing, he didn't even know how to put the worm on the hook. And I thought that was odd as anything. And then Susie, of course, everyone said everything so far, but she let you know exactly the way she felt. And boy, it took me a long time to figure out why I was the favorite son-in-law. But I was.
I have to tell you one thing she used to say about Blaine. No matter who had a baby, or whoever the baby was born, she'd always say, but Blaine will always be the first.
That's why he's the oldest.
I wasn't planning on saying anything today. I seem to not pay attention to assignments as they come to me. I already got in trouble once today with my wife, so I better not forgo this opportunity, and I'll be in trouble with my mother too. But anyway, some of the memories I have of Grandma and Grandpa are varied, and I remember things as the rest of you have talked today. One thing that I remember in particular about my grandfather is his work at Geneva. I'd like to know a little bit more about exactly what he did there in the early construction days. We were taking out a section of floor and some remodeling construction we're doing there in Geneva. And I thought as they lifted these big hunks of cement out of the floor there to put some new hydraulic valves in, that possibly Grandpa Ashby who worked on a crew that helped put that cement in. So it was very distinct possibility that he was there and did that work. I don't know just exactly where he worked there in Geneva, but he did, as was mentioned earlier, do work with the concrete and putting in rebar, and was quite a skilled craftsman in that area. Another memory I have of going over to Grandma and Grandpa's after we were married is Grandma always had to show us the flowers outside. I remember a summer day going over there, and we visited a while, and Carol's grandfather had come with us that particular day. He was about the same age as my grandfather, and they were talking, and Grandma said, let's just leave them here and we'll go out and look at the flowers. So she showed us her flowers. When we come back in, both grandpas were sound asleep in the chair. So we visited a few minutes longer, and then we left, and we had to shake Grandpa Brannigan and say, we're leaving now. And he got up, he said, oh, Albert, he said, it's been so nice visiting with you today. And he says, I appreciate the visit. And Grandma said, oh my heaven, both of you just slept all the time. And Grandma always told it the way it was, and didn't pull any punches. Another one of my favorite memories of grandmother, hearing a story, and I don't know all the details of it. I'd like to know just a little bit more about it, but part of her job when she was working at DI was she had a desk or an office just as people would come from the shopping area into the working area there, and part of her job was to make sure that the shoppers didn't stray down into the area where the workers were. And one day one of the general authorities, he was one of the 12 apostles, came down there, and he walked by our desk going in, and he says, just a minute, brother, you can't go in here. And he says, well, I'm Brother so-and-so from the Quorum of the 12, and part of my assignment is overseeing the DI. So I'm just going back to check some things out. She says, that's fine, we're glad to have you here, but you go upstairs and get a pass before you come down here. So she always, like I say, told it like it was, and didn't pull any punches no matter who it was. But I've had a lot of fond memories of my grandparents, and a lot of the things that we are today, we owe to them. I just like to bear you my testimony that it strengthens me to hear the things that you said, the things that I remember with my grandparents. And I do this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Well, as one of the favorite granddaughter-in-laws, we lived in Payson a couple years in their ward, and she was so cute with our kids. They loved Grandma and Grandpa. And in Karen's scrapbook that I put together for her, I saw a little homemade paper first place award or second place, I can't remember, and it has a little flower sticker on it, and it was awarded to Karen, and I had written in that those flowers were picked out of Grandma's garden. Grandma helped her get her flower arrangement, and I can remember Grandma submitting flowers every Onion Day, and she won a lot of prizes for her flowers, and she was very proud of them. And then I've got a picture in Stephen's book, and he's in his scout uniform, and he's standing there at the front door, and Grandma's just grinning at him. And he was doing his Eagle Scout project, and they had put it in the paper that he'd gone to his great-grandparents' home to start the project. So and she was fun to go to Salt Lake with. I got to go to Salt Lake a few times, and we had really a lot of fun with her. She was a character. She told about Albert coming home from the mines. Did he work in the mine at one time?
Yeah.
He came home with a mustache, and she wanted him to shave it off, and he didn't want to. And she got her boys to sit on him, and she shaved half of one off, so that he had to shave the other half off. She was full of it.
Well, I, like the rest of you, have lots of fond memories of my grandparents. Their love for flowers, didn't mention. I remember Grandpa Ashby out there with the water, weeding the garden. And Grandma's love for flowers. I have flowers in my yard that came from Grandma and Grandpa's place. And they are the most beautiful flowers because of that. The memories that they bring. The poppies that they had growing on the west side of the last home that they lived in. I have some of those in my yard. And they are a nuisance. They spread all over the place, but I still have them there. And if any of you want some, well, I'd be glad to give you a shovelful. I have Shasta daisies in my yard that came from their home. I have tulips that are the early varieties that came from their home. And so that's one of the things that my dad loved also was flowers. And I have many flowers in my yard from his place. As I was looking through Grandma's history, I found just a little quote that I'd like to read, if I can find it.
You can see it too, huh?
Yeah. Grandma said, "I am proud of my very special family, Gerald, Dean, Lamar, and Carr. We had many quiet talks, and I enjoy the ones that they married. I know there are no better children anywhere, and they are all so good to me." And I'm sure she's proud of what's going on here tonight. This has been a fun year with the centennial, and I never realized that Grandma and Grandpa would have been 100 years old this year, and I'm so glad that we're having this party here tonight. I like to follow the centennial of Utah, so Bonnie and I started January the 4th, went to Salt Lake, and they did the reenactment of the centennial of Utah. We went up and they rededicated the This Is the Place monument, went to that, and then this here tonight really brings it to a great year for the centennial of the state and for the birthdays of Grandma and Grandpa Ashby.
Well, I wasn't really raised up with Grandma for a lot of years, you know. When Daryl and I got married, they used to have us down for lunch a lot of times, and I do remember the fried chicken and how wonderful it was. And I guess I should say, I don't know if it was as great as my mother's, but but it was really good. And I always remember that because it was almost just as good as my mother's. And we really had a good time coming down. And when the kids were small, they used to, when we used to come visit Jen and Dean down there, we'd always have to stop at Grandma's and go down and see them. And the kids, I remember all the kids always would get on the floor and pull out the little, their blocks, the drawer with all the blocks in it. And so they always had a good time. And then Grandma always made sure that they put them back up when they got through. And I remember going shopping in Provo with them a couple of times with Grandma Suzy, and that was a lot of fun. And Daryl was here, he would say he probably was the favorite as well, because he loved Grandma Suzy, and they used to love to pick on each other, and they used to teach each other all the time, and they really had a good time. And he could really, I know, tell you some fun stories. So, but she was really fun, and we loved her.
I have a hard time remembering everything I was supposed to say, but one thing I was going to tell you about was a little bit about Grandma Ashby's grandfather. He's my great-great-grandfather. He was 19 when he was living in Nauvoo and left Nauvoo with the Saints as they went across the frozen Mississippi River. And as they were crossing the plains there, he was called to serve the Mormon Battalion. And he served the full time in the Mormon Battalion, going down through Texas and up through California, panning gold in Sutter's Mill, and got, I can't remember the dollar amount, but it was a few $100s of gold, and headed back home to marry his sweetheart. But one of the things I'd like to do is visiting great-grandfather's gravesite. The headstone is still standing, but it's kind of leaning a little bit. Looks like maybe sometime it would fall. I was going to get with someone that could maybe help us get that straightened out, maybe put a little marker on the grave that he was with the Mormon Battalion. So sometime in the future, I'm going to check on that and maybe contact all of you and see if you'd like to donate a few dollars to doing this and improving the monument and making the marker that he served in the Mormon Battalion. I don't think it'd be a great cost for any one of us could do it, but it'd be good to do that through the centennial year, and I'll take that project on, be in contact with you.
I'll just share a quick story. When Brad and I got engaged, and he told me he was taking me over to meet Grandma Suzy, he said, now I've got to warn you about my grandma. She tells it the way it is. And she told a brand new couple who just had their first baby that she didn't like the way the name they picked out to name their baby. And I thought, oh dear, you know, I hope she likes me. But I always felt loved and welcomed, and like many have mentioned, Grandma always felt that whether you were born in the family or not, boy, the minute you married in the family, you were part of the family. And I remember one time her telling me that when Albert was in California for over a year and she was at home with the 3 boys all by herself, her bishop thought she was a widow because she had no husband. And she also told me that there was a man who tried to convince her to leave Albert and to get a divorce and marry him and go with him. But and I thought that was really interesting because sometimes she was a little short with Grandpa, and you wondered if she really loved him, you know, because she wasn't very always as kind to him as she was to the rest of us, you know. But I think in her heart she really did love him, and she was very devoted to him, and there was no way you were gonna, you know, take her away from Albert. And I thought that was, you know, she just was one of those people that spoke her mind, but she always loved you, and you knew that. And the minute we'd go over to visit her after we were married, and she would never want you to leave without something, whether it was apricots from her apricot tree or peonies from the garden. She wanted to send you away with something, and you always felt like you ought to be bringing her something. And I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to know her in our young married lives, and to have her know some of our children.
Come on, let's have some of the younger ones up there.
Just
getting up, weren't you?
I was pretty young when Grandma died, and I don't have very many memories of her. But what I do remember about her is my mom packing us all in the car and taking us over on a Saturday or a Sunday and climbing up in the trees and picking cherries. And I remember one day specifically that I was up in one of her trees picking the cherries and eating them and getting cherry stuff all over me, and I saw a spider on one of the branches, and I was deathly afraid of spiders, being about 5 or 6 years old, and I fell out of the tree. And she came out and she laughed at me for falling out of the tree. And I didn't get back in the tree for the rest of that day because I was afraid of that spider. But then the next time I came over, I remember her telling me that there were no spiders in her trees and that I shouldn't be afraid to fall out of them anymore. That's all I had to say.
Well, I guess I'll get that since I've been playing with the baby the whole time. I remember Grandma Suzy, but I don't really remember Grandpa Ashby. I remember that, I just remember him vaguely. I remember what he looked like. I remember the day that he died, that it was such a serious day, and that the kids were playing and I was one of them, and we were laughing, and I got so much trouble because it was such a bad day. I remember that's my one memory I remember, that I got in trouble because the day he died. It was just such a sad day for everybody. I just didn't understand. And with Grandma Suzy, her house was always so much fun. I loved to go over to her house. She had so many fun little neat things in every single room, and you'd go over and it was like this little fun playland. You'd walk through the rooms and wonder what you could find next. And she always had these fun little antique kind of things to play with, and the blocks were always a blast. So I do remember her, and I remember the cats, and I just remember how fun it was to go outside and just how unique her house was, and I just love that about her. She was a really sweet lady. Thanks.
I can remember when Joanna was just little. Grandma must have passed some of her spunk on to some of her grandkids, because Joanna was about 2 years old. She was telling everybody that she was in the junior Sunday school, and she told Grandma to sit down and be quiet. And Grandma says, "Who do you think you are? This is my house." And Joanna says, it's Sunday school, and you need to be quiet. So I think that sometimes her traits are passed on to some of our kids. Every once in a while you hear somebody say, "You act just like your grandmother," or something like that.
Hey, Dennis, we haven't heard from you.
Come on, Bishop.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else who would like to say something? Have one over there, huh?
Just one thing. There's just one thing. I just remember she swore.
Swore a lot.
I just remember her swearing.
She never swore at me, so I don't remember that.
You were the favorite.
I still have a $2 check that she sent me for my last birthday that she was alive. I know that she sent some of the others 20.
So you wasn't her favorite after all.
Well, I thought I was, as we all did.
I think they're all equal.
This was a great night. I really enjoyed it, and I think that all of you did too. I hope that when I have a 100-year birthday, that my family could gather, have that many good things to say about me. That would really be something. I was at a thing put on Stephen R. Covey once, and one of the little case studies or problems they give us is to write down what you'd like to have people say at your funeral. And that's pretty neat what's going on here tonight. It's a testimony that families are together and can be together, and we all have learned from Grandma and Grandpa Ashby. We've learned a great deal. So unless somebody else would like to
Well, I just
say
have
a
to
few
say
words.
one thing, and that is that we all owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Phyllis and her family. Phyllis has worked so hard on this, and yet it's been so fun for her, I think, so energized. I've never talked to her so much in 5 years as I have since she's been planning this party. She just calls up and says, "Now, what do you think about this? And what should we do about that?" And it's because of Phyllis and Marilyn and David and Blaine and Garth that we had this wonderful evening, and Ann.
Garth's not here, don't give him credit.
Ann should definitely get more credit than Garth.
Right.
Thanks, Susie Ann.
I'll tell you, another person I really miss here tonight is Linda. And Linda has got a lot of grandma in her, and so has Linda's daughters. And it would have been fun to have had them. But it's really been a special night. But I think we ought to give Phyllis and her family a great
I'm pretty sure his mother was making calls, arranging this and stuff. When she got through, she just hung up too, just like Susie used to.
That came in our genes too.
She never said goodbye. She just hung up.
You were
Well,
talking.
she was through talking. Why would you say any more?
And that's the way your dad was. That's the way
Is that right?
Gerald was. When he was through talking, clung.
Well, that's the way Mother is too.
I think it must have come in the genes, and Phil Phyllis, it has to be a learned behavior. I guess.
She used to talk to me, I'd call her up, and she said, I've got time to talk to you now, I'll call you later.
Who said that?
Grandma.
Oh.
She thought it was her. So maybe if we could have a closing prayer. Dennis, would you like to give us a word of prayer before we leave?
Grandparents and our heritage. And be thankful for them and for the many blessings they brought into our lives. And for the opportunity to have a meeting and associated one with another and being able to reminisce. We're grateful for the gospel and for what it means in our lives. We pray that we'll be able to always have that spirit with us to guide and direct us and help us to stay close to those things that we know that our ancestors would have us doing. We ask you to bless us, we leave this night, we might be able to travel in safety, and be able to find all well at home. We pray for these things